On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Ryan Hartman gets the hammer, and Liam Ohgren is in Iowa. We discuss all that and more on today's episode of Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Wild podcast. We are your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube if you have not already, or in your favorite podcast platform. We are on Spotify, we are on Apple Podcasts, we are on Amazon Music, and Sirius XM. So wherever you are tuning in, we thank you for being part of the Locked On Wild community, and make sure to spread the word so that we can continue to cultivate this audience. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we will discuss Ryan Hartman's 3-game suspension, why there is really only one factor that matters, regardless of what happened on the ice, that led to Hartman showing his frustration. We'll also talk about the news that Liam Ohgren is in Iowa and will finish the season with the Iowa Wilds to help get himself ready for the World Juniors. And the Ottawa Senators in town tonight. We'll take a look at tonight's game as well. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, credentialed Wild media member. Seeing things from a little different perspective here tonight. The Locked On Senators boys in town, and so we're going to take this one in as a fan. And so if you are in the area tonight, hit me up on X or on Instagram. If you are at the game tonight, let me know. We'll try to get a couple of meet and greets lined up for tonight's game. The big news, obviously, that came through the pipeline, Ryan Hartman has officially been suspended 3 games by the Department of Player Safety. He had a hearing in regards to an incident that, frankly, until yesterday, did not even see the video of. Hartman getting a game misconduct after the game was essentially over against the Vegas Golden Knights. But here's the thing. Regardless of, because the officials did they definitely missed a high stick. Hartman was high-sticked right in front of the net in regulation. Game went to overtime. Wild pulled the goalie. Vegas scores the game winner, and the Wilds come home empty-handed. You can't refute that. There was a high stick that was missed. And so Hartman was understandably angry about what took place. But what happened was Hartman left the bench, he came back, and he javelin threw his stick onto the ice. Number one, Ryan Hartman is a repeat offender with Department of Player Safety. So you don't get any grace. You don't get any benefit of the doubt. You don't get any leniency by being a repeat offender. So that's point number one. Point number two is that the rule book specifically states that if you throw your stick in the direction of an official, it's an automatic 3-game suspension. Hartman said today that he regrets his actions. He actually was given the option of a hearing. He took the option to go apologize. But regardless of if you feel like you have been jobbed by the officials, if you feel like a call was missed, there's no place to do what was done at the end of the game. And this is something that has routinely popped up for this Minnesota Wild team over the years is the feeling that the officials are out to get them. They're not. But what does end up happening is this is a Wild team that, because of the sheer volume of penalties that they themselves commit, there's a feeling that, if you go to the penalty box a bunch of times for various things, that you should in turn be able to get power plays yourself. And it doesn't always work that way. And are there 50-50 calls that go against the Wild that shouldn't? Sure. Are there calls that go against other teams that are not called or are ticky-tack? Absolutely. But this Wild team has shown over the last few seasons that they have a tendency to get frustrated when things don't go their way. Pete DeBoer talked about it at length in the series against the Stars in the postseason last year. It is pretty open book at this point for this Minnesota Wild team. And so that is something Hartman said he's going to use it as a learning experience. The entire team needs to use this as a learning experience, because whether you think the officials have called a perfect game or not, you can't put yourself in a situation like what happened at the end of that Vegas game. Because let's say the Wild are still in postseason position somehow down the stretch. Well, now Hartman has put himself in position to not be able to help the team out for a 3-game stretch in a critical part of the season. The way it works out, Adam Beckman is going to get that spot where he plays in the lineup. We'll talk a little bit more about here as the show unfolds. But if this team was, in a similar spot to where the St. Louis Blues are right now, 3 points out with 9 games to play, and one of your secondary scorers does something like this, puts himself in position to not be able to play for 3 games, you're hurting the team. So learning experience, absolutely. It should be. But there just is no place in which you can do that, regardless of if you think you're getting the best officiating in the league on any given night or the worst. You have to find a way to overcome it. Every team has instances in which they feel like they have calls go against them. That's just part of it. Officials are human. Officials make mistakes. Officials see things one way. Replay shows something else entirely. You can't throw your hands up in the air and say, well, we can't beat the officials and the other team. You have to find a way. So use it as a learning experience, but I saw a lot of surprise on Twitter and saying, well, Jack Eichel then should get suspended for spearing Kirill Kaprizov. These are 2 different instances. These are 2 different situations. Jack Eichel got a game misconduct during the game. He missed basically the entirety of the 3rd period. And Ryan Hartman did his as a repeat offender after the game was done. 2 different instances. So it's a 3-game suspension for Hartman. He's going to miss out on about $63K. The GoFundMes, I'm sure, have already been started for Wild fans, but there have been a lot of learning experiences this season, and this definitely needs to be another one as well. So we'll move from that to some exciting news here today. Liam Ohgren is in Iowa and will be playing the rest of the season with the Iowa Wilds to get himself a little more ready for the World Junior Championships. We'll talk about a very all of a sudden exciting end to the season for the Iowa Wild. That's coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. The sports calendar is loaded, and FanDuel's making it even more exciting to get in on the action. Because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 to use on the tourney, MLB, NBA, NHL, and so much more. And so I'm going to give you a little advice for tonight's game so that you can then take those bonus bets and use them this weekend for the Final Four, for NBA action, Major League Baseball as well. Here's what we're going with for tonight's game between the Wild and the Senators. Anytime goal scorer, Kirill Kaprizov is plus 100 tonight against the Sens. Boom, done. Book it and don't look back. Just take that easy $5 bet and turn it into 200 bonus bets at FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to make your first bet a big win. FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to tonight's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we'll be taking the game in as a fan tonight with the fellas at Locked on Senators. So our post-game coverage will not be the standard postcast here tonight, although I do believe I'm going to hop on with Locked on Senators for their postcast this evening. We'll put the word out once that gets ironed out. So make sure to stay tuned because it may be that our postcast is done over on the Locked on Senators YouTube channel here this evening. Got some interesting news earlier today from Michael Russo in regards to top Wild prospect Liam Ohgren. And so we read the following, if I can find it. So basically the gist of it, here we go. Hearing Minnesota Wild first-round pick Liam Ohgren has arrived in North America and is headed to Iowa to play the rest of the season. This should also get him prepped for the World Junior Championships, Russo assumes. The Minnesota Wild tweeting out the same, tweeting out that Ohgren has been assigned to the Iowa Wild. He has 19 points, or he had 19 points in 26 games with Farsted BK in the Swedish Elite League this season and served as Sweden's team captain at the 2024 IIHF World Junior Championships. And so suddenly, an Iowa Wild season that just did not go according to plan, all of a sudden has a ton of different players at the Iowa Wild level that we should all be keeping an eye on. And this is the perfect way to complement what we will be seeing hopefully more of here at the NHL level, is seeing these prospects get an opportunity to get some seasoning at various levels. So at the Iowa level, some guys that you should be keeping an eye on, and we will be, of course. Got Vladislav Firstov taking the ice for the Iowa Wild. You've got Liam Ohgren officially on the roster for Iowa. Of course, the acquisition, Luke Toporowski, continuing to have a solid season down in Iowa. Jack Pert on the list for the Iowa Wild as well. And so, as frustrating as this season has been at various points and how up and down it has been, the reality of the situation is that this season and next were always going to be tricky. We knew that the moment the buyouts happened. And so the continued window, the continued push needs to be to 2025, 2026. That is when we can start to have more of a sense that you can build this thing up fully and actually dare I say, put together a roster that is capable of contending for a Stanley Cup. Current restraints, just not possible. But here's the other piece of this, and this is the piece that we continue to try to hammer home, and that I think kind of gets missed a little bit by the levels of the organization, is that you can't just thrust those guys into spots and then be surprised. You can't thrust them into particular spots and then be surprised when they don't like knock it out of the park. You know, you can't have these prospects come up and play just fourth line minutes, play a fourth line wing spot and expect them to be put in any sort of position to be able to succeed. We're seeing with all of these guys that are going to be getting opportunities at training camp, you know, the rumors of Riley Heidt getting potentially a 9-game cup of tea with the team next year. My point being is, like, if you're going to shake up, and I think the Wild probably will, shake up their fourth line to where you have 2 or 3 spots in which you have available for some of these prospects to take. You have guys on this roster, if you're going to keep them around, which I'm still in favor of moving for whatever you can get for them. But if you've got guys like Freddie Gaudreau, if you've got guys like Marcus Johansson, and you're not going to move them, you got to open opportunities for some of these players to come up and to get legitimate chances to see what they have available. Well, they got to earn it. They got to earn their opportunity. They haven't shown enough to be able to warrant being bumped up in the lineup. I don't buy that line of thinking, because it's a problem that you have a guy like Adam Beckman who steps in and just looks like this breath of fresh air, because he's simply doing more than like absolute bare minimum. We've tracked Marcus Johansson's output all season. 69 games played so far this season. 41 of them have included 1 or fewer shots. And for a team that has struggled ever since that top line of Kaprizov, Boldy, and Eriksson Ek was put together, ever since that line was put together, the secondary scoring has struggled. You have to have multiple lines that give you an opportunity. And you're probably not going to shake up Matt Zuccarello and Marco Rossi much at all. But you know what you can do here for these next 3 games that would really be an opportunity to see what a guy has, is instead of throwing Marcus Johansson in that spot just because he's done it before and you're putting a veteran in, you're not going to get, you're not going to get some of the rookie mistakes. And I get tired of saying the rookie mistakes because we just assume that these players are going to come in and get a mess up. That's a terrible mindset to have. What you should be doing is you should be saying, hey, Beckman, here's an opportunity on the second line with Eriksson, with Zuccarello and Rossi. Go get them. Go just do your thing. Shot opportunities are there. Just let them rip. Do that. You are not, like, you're down to about a 1.2% chance to make the postseason. And if you at this point are still afraid of making mistakes, that is a mentality that has to be fully exercised from this organization. Because, yeah, rookie players come in and they may not take to everything at the NHL level immediately. But you know what they do? They learn. They learn quickly. And they are not as likely to repeat those mistakes. But a lot of times you can get surprised by what young players do. And so, this piggybacks off of Hartman getting a 3-game suspension. Adam Beckman should play in that spot all 3 games. They're just, we've seen enough of the book on Johansson in that spot. We've seen enough of the book this season for Johansson. It's time to see what comes next. It's time to see what you have, which of these young players can surprise you to the point that then maybe you do look to move a couple of pieces in the offseason to supplant, to build around that. You move some of these veteran players to try to cultivate more of this youth instead of just throwing the same thing out there every single night. Rick Bowness just went nuts about this with the Winnipeg Jets because the Jets had lost 6 in a row. We're basically using the same lineup combinations. He said, we have to stop this. We have to stop throwing the same thing out there game in and game out and expecting that it's going to change. And I'll give John Hines credit that he seems pretty keen on flow in the game, that he's willing to move things around during the game to try to get, try to take advantage of a guy that is having a good performance while his line mates aren't up to par. Like we saw with Marat Huznadinov getting bumped up and playing with Hartman and Zuccarello at the end of the game. He does a lot of stuff like that. But then we just go back to these same combinations after the game is done. Like, it is time to see what you have coming next. That needs to be the sole focus of these final few games of the season, which starts tonight against the Ottawa Senators. And so we'll finish today's episode by just seeing how these teams stack up and who we're keeping an eye on for tonight's matchup against Ottawa. That is coming up as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is also brought to you by Sleeper. And with the final few weeks of the season in progress, your team is either tinkering with their playoff lineup or seeing what is coming next in the future. Regardless, you can still win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether your favorite Wild players. Kirill Kaprizov would be a great one for this. Joel Eriksson, Matt Boldy, Marco Rossi, Marat Huznadinov. Pick whether your favorite Wild players will record more or less than their Sleeper projections in categories such as goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game. To win 100 times your bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly pick the outcome of 8 player stats. So head to the Sleeper app, use promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Ooh, that last segment got me fired up. Should be fun tonight. Honestly, this is the first time, tonight's game is the first time I've attended a game as a fan since taking over as host of Locked On Wild. And so when the Locked On Senators guys said that they were going to be in town and were going to be taking the game in from the seats, I was amped to be able to be part of that as well. And so if you are going to be at the game tonight and want to meet up, shoot me a message on X, shoot me a message on Instagram. Any of the Locked On Wild accounts, I'll have access to everything here tonight. So just shoot me a message and we'll see what we can get ironed out here this evening. Against the Ottawa Senators. The Senators coming in a similar spot to the Minnesota Wild. They are 33, 36, and 4, 13, 20, and 2 on the road. Wild come in 35, 28, and 10, 19, 12, and 6 at home this season. The Senators, 3.19 goals per game compared to 3.03 for the Minnesota Wild. Goals against at 3.47 for the Sens, 3.15 for the Minnesota Wild. Both comparable in shots. Senators 2 more at 32.2 to 30.2 for the Wild. Shots against per game are nearly identical. 29.9 for the Sens, 29.8 for the Wild. Big disparity in the penalty minutes, 760 for Ottawa, 886 for the Minnesota Wild. Wild with 52 power play goals to the Senators 44. That's a 21.5 power play for Minnesota. Senators are 4 percentage points worse at 17.5. Penalty kill, one of the rare teams with a penalty kill that is worse than the Minnesota Wild this year. Sens are at 73.6. Wild are at 74.8. Senators, though, have won at least five in a row. We'll see just how far back this winning streak that they are currently on goes. It is 5 in a row. And so they are 8-3 in their last 11 contests. Before that, a 7-game losing streak. So the Senators starting to figure it out here. Over this stretch, they have beaten Pittsburgh in overtime, Columbus in a shootout, the Islanders in overtime. They lost to Carolina, Boston, and St. Louis by scores of 7-2, 6-2, and 5-2. And now they have beaten New Jersey, Edmonton, Buffalo, Chicago, and 3-2 over Winnipeg on Saturday. So some nice wins for the Ottawa Senators over the last 5. And just at this point, kind of trying to build a foundation for going into next season, like trying to figure out who is part of who's one of the key pieces for this roster. Like, who are your go-to guys? Who do you build around? Beyond that, some names that I am going to be keeping an eye on here tonight. Obviously, Tim Stützle is a tremendous young talent, leads the Senators in points with 69 in 73 games. Brady Tkachuk has 33 goals, 32 assists, 65 points in 72 games. Also has 122 penalty minutes on the season. And so Tkachuk, obviously, one of their best players. You've got Claude Giroux, Drake Batherson, you name it. They have some good players on that group, but you look at the goalie situation for the Senators, that's where the issues have come in. A collective 3.47 goals against average and a save percentage of .888 as a team. Whether it be Jonas Korpisalo, who's 19, 21, and 4 with an .891 save percentage. Anton Forsberg, who's 13 and 12. He's rocking an .888. Or Mads Søgaard, who's 1-3. He's got an .859. It has not been a good season for the goalies in Ottawa this season. And so even with the single line that is doing most of the work for the Wild here over the last few games, there should be plenty of opportunities to get some goals on the board. Although the last time these two teams met, if you'll recall, that was a 2-1 shootout win for the Senators in Sweden. So all the way back in November was the last time these two teams played. Here's what I want from the Wild perspective. We're not going to do like the keys to the game. Here's what I want. Haven't seen line rushes for today. I would imagine, though, it's going to be pretty predictable as to how these look. Just seeing if Russo has or Smith have anything. April 1st, it was the same. It was Johansson, Kuznetsov, and Gaudreau, Shaw, Lucchini, Lettieri. And so it'll be interesting to see where Beckman slots in the lineup tonight. If he's playing on the fourth line, I'm not going to be particularly pleased about that development. Because, again, going back to what we said, we've seen enough of a game log for Marcus Johansson at this point that I would just love to see Beckman get that opportunity just so that we can see how he functions as a shooter on a line with two guys that are real good playmakers in Zuccarello and Rossi. If you are going to continue to put Murat Huznadinov as your third center, that's fine, because at this point, Eriksson Ek is your top guy. Rossi's still having a very strong season. So if Huznadinov is your third line center, that's fine, but give him somebody else. Give him somebody else in those line pairings. Honestly, like, I at this point, I guess, would just rather see, because they have speed, I just try it, I guess, with Lettieri and Lucchini on the third line, and then go, or Shaw on the third line, maybe Lettieri and Shaw as the wings, and go Johansson, Gaudreau, and Lucchini as the fourth line. I just am, I'm kind of done with that bottom six. Like, I think that needs a lot of work going into next season. And I just am kind of done with the whole showing up and just existing that has happened for that bottom six. But this is the crux of the issue with the Minnesota Wild. It always has been, is that if you had the guys that you locked in bottom six spots and you had a top six above them, you don't have any issues, really. But we're not at that point. And so I just want to see tonight, I want to see Beckman have a strong game. I want to see Murat Huznadinov build off of a great performance against Vegas. Let's see some more good from Rossi, from Faber, and from that top line in general. Maybe just enough to be close, but a regulation loss late, that's fine by me. I just would like to see some signs of the future kind of take the lead down this stretch of the season, is just to see some of those other guys get opportunities and to show the team, yeah, I could have done this the whole season if you would have simply given me the chance, is kind of where we're at. So again, I'll be in the crowd tonight, so won't be bringing you the normal in-game content as much. We'll have a few things that we'll do, I believe, kind of getting that ironed out. And we'll let you know if there is a postcast over on Locked On Senators. We'll, of course, direct you there this evening. So should be a fun game tonight. We'll see how things play out. But as always, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure that you hit the like button for today's video. Subscribe on either YouTube or your favorite audio platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We've got you covered pre and post, plus every day of the week with new episodes, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network.